You're very welcome. This week, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin and the Housing Minister Darragh O'Brien launched the government's programme to tackle the growing housing crisis in the country. It's called Housing for All, and it promises to deliver enough new houses over the coming years to solve the housing crisis. My guest this week is Brian Reilly. Brian is a founder member of Right2Homes, and he has first-hand experience of dealing with the Taoiseach Micheál Martin and with Housing Minister Darragh O'Brien in the whole area of trying to solve the housing crisis. Good evening, Brian.
Good evening, Anna, and it's great to see you back in action. I'd like to congratulate you and Finbar and everybody involved for keeping up the good work. We need as many alternative platforms as we can get, obviously.
Yes.
So,
well, Brian, maybe you might begin by telling us about Right2Homes and, more importantly, about the Right2Homes bill that came before the Dáil in 2018.
Okay, now, just to put it in context, I was delighted to get your call, and I'm happy to have a chat about this. And I thought long and hard about it because, as some friends and colleagues have pointed out, there are a lot of positives happening in Ireland. So we don't want to be too hard on ourselves. But there is this protracted difficulty with housing, with distressed debt, with homelessness, and all the related things in there. So happy to talk about that. And the big question is, what about Darragh, of course? Now, I'm going to leave, if you don't mind, Anna, and we can chat about it, but I'm going to leave the critical analysis of whatever you want to call it, Homes for All or Rebuilding Ireland to Mark 3 or Mark 4. Really, given the track record of those launches and the results, it's difficult not to be skeptical. I suppose it's a similar ploy to what was attempted in the past. I'm here, and as you said at the top of your introduction, my experience really is with Right2Homes and then with countless politicians inside, but in particular Darragh O'Brien, Fianna Fáil, and our attempts to get legislation passed, which a journey that started back in 2016, would you believe? And I suppose I just took a note here, and when you look at, we've had attempts at this spin, and it is spin, a lot of it. Only time will tell whether there's any substance to it. But the first attempt was by Alan Kelly. And in the week of Leaving Cert results, that's a fail. Then you had Simon Coveney, the greatest spoofer in Irish politics, confidence trickster. And that was another fail, twice, I think, on his case. And then Yvonne Murphy stepped up, came out with all these plans. And interestingly enough, I was invited some time back to go down and give a little talk about Right2Homes with some mature students in Cork. And before I went, I didn't know what I was going to talk about other than the legislation. It's difficult to make that interesting. So I spoke to Mel Reynolds here in Dublin before I went down, and he had done some work with Kitty Holland in the Irish Times, and he said to me, if you want to have a dramatic statistic when you go to Cork, ask the question about, despite all of the spin and all of the launches and all of the Rebuilding Ireland and all the grandiose plans and all the countless hours on RTE and all the rest of it, how many affordable houses at that stage had been built in Cork? And would you believe that the answer to that question is one? Now, not one of the mature students got that. So if you sit down and talk to 10 or 12 people, you'll get 12 different answers. But the reality was one. And you're going to have critical analysis of housing for everyone or for all. And let's, in fairness, leave that to the Dr. Lorcan Sir and Dr. Pádraig Kenna and Dr. Rory Hearn and all of these eminent people who know what they're talking about and can get into what's actually intended in the bill. For my part, and as you've asked me to do, I just want to relate a little bit about the journey that we had and the actual experience. So I know it's a well-known thing that, and I actually be a subscriber to it, you know, to be careful not to shoot the messenger. But in this case, I think we're justified in taking a really hard look at who's delivering the message this time. So back in 2016, I was invited in to attend with a small panel of people in the finance committee, having founded Right2Homes. And Right2Homes' principal objective was to support the creation of legislation aimed at, and this is very important because it's missing in this grand plan that they have now, keeping people in their existing homes. Now, when you consider the number of loans and distressed loans and mortgages and so on that have been sold to vulture funds, all of those houses and homes and families are a threat. Some are in the court process at the moment. Some have orders or possession orders pending. All of that mayhem is coming down the track, and especially as people approach their pensionable age or set the age, you know, the 70 and so on. There's a whole lot of complications in there. There's nothing in this plan to deal with that aspect. So let's go back, if I may, to the individuals. So in 2016, I appeared at that finance committee as a guest. Afterwards, I spoke to the chairman, John McGuinness, and that led to an invitation back in to Leinster House to tell them how I really felt, which I did. I was then invited by none other than Darragh O'Brien to engage with a group of people, a working group within Fianna Fáil, with the objective back then, 2016, to come up with a people's bill from outside the system, which they would support, and then without interfering with confidence and supply and whatever arrangements they had, and running into a confrontation with Fine Gael. However, the objective was, as you've often heard Micheál Martin talking about as well, was to get Fine Gael's hands off the whole issue of housing and vulture funds and vested interests and so on. So we set about doing that, and that journey brought us in contact with the Master of the High Court and others, a number of others, who contributed to a piece of legislation. We initially started down the line of the cooperative society, went to New York, tried to find out how much financial support we could get for something like that. Very successfully, I should add. And it morphed, anyway, it evolved into a piece of legislation called the Affordable Housing and Fair Mortgage Bill 2018. That was launched with great fanfare in Leinster House, a packed AVA room with politicians from all parties, bar Fine Gael, as I recall, but all of the others were there, including Fianna Fáil. And then John McGuinness took to the parliamentary party. This is where the first line of resistance came. And that was from individuals like Barry Cowan, like Timmy Dooley, like Jim Callaghan, Micheál Martin, and so on. The only one really sticking their neck out at that stage to support John was Mark McSharry and one or two others. So that was the first resistance. John then decided, John McGuinness, as chairman of the finance committee, he decided to present the bill as a private member's bill. And would you believe, we invited a whole pile of guests into Leinster House that day. So we had a packed gallery, standing ovation for John when he launched the bill. But as soon as he stood up, Micheál Martin stood up, closed his books and walked out. And that sent a powerful message to Fine Gael on the opposite side, that this was not going to be supported by Fianna Fáil. So here you're into the whole realm of sincerity and political will and so on. So first-hand experience, based on that, I would not trust one word out of either any of them, with the exception, obviously, of John and Mark. But the rest of them are for the birds.
Okay, so just to, I suppose,
I'll tell you how I really, sorry, Anna, I'll tell you how I really feel when I meet you for a coffee.
Well, I suppose just to reiterate what you have just said, that Fianna Fáil were in opposition. It was confidence and supply, the confidence and supply arrangement at the time. Fine Gael were in power, and of course housing was the number one issue at that time. So you were approached by a number of people in Fianna Fáil, among them Darragh O'Brien. You set up the Right2Homes group. The Master of the High Court, Edmund Honohan, drafted the bill. It was introduced into the Dáil, and basically it was shelved. So going on your experience, you don't hold out much hope for the Housing for All bill that was launched this week. Now, I suppose you mentioned there that some people have welcomed the bill and more people haven't. An opinion piece in today's Irish Times by David McWilliams calls on people to hold off on buying a house for the moment, because he believes that this bill is going to deliver the extra houses that are needed. And towards the end of his opinion piece, he has a word of advice for parents to hold back on giving deposits to their children to you know, as a deposit for a house, because he said it's only a matter of time before the government is going to deliver, and the cost of housing is going to come down. On the other hand, you mentioned Rory Ahern there, and Dr. Rory Ahern is the Assistant Professor of Social Policy in Maynooth University, and in an opinion piece earlier this week in the Irish Examiner, he is very, very critical of the bill. You pointed out that the proposed bill fails to deliver for people who are threatened with eviction. There's no right to remain on in your own home covered in this bill. And Rory Ahern says that it fails to deliver for the 345,000 people or households that are currently renting. So another aspect of it is the Land Development Agency. Tell me what you know about the Land Development Agency. And
I will gladly. But the just before we go off the two of the points you made there, Anna. First of all, I sincerely hope that David McWilliams and anybody else who's welcoming the provisions in the bill, I hope they're right, and we should all hope so. Darragh O'Brien and the likes and Micheál Martin will be long gone to the hills before anybody gets to really evaluate what they're talking about. If they were really serious about doing stuff right now, they would have had radical provisions in there to, number one, keep people in their homes. Number two, I think Rory Ahern and others have pointed to the fact that there's almost 1 million people between generation rent and generation stuck at home who will get very little solace out of the measures that have been put forward there. It's all future looking, and that brings us to the LDA. Now, in our journey, we also engaged on a number of occasions with John Moran, who was the chair of the Land Development Agency. And for those of you who want to Google, you'll see that only a short while ago, he stepped down and resigned. And he sent a letter to Darragh O'Brien. And this tells you a lot, I think, because first of all, you had the usual clowns turning up on RTE and not being quizzed really critically, the likes of Richard Bruton and others, rolling out the LDA was going to provide this, that, and the other. The solution was here, 120,000 homes or whatever. John Moran, who was the chair of it and involved in the founding of it, had a completely different take on all of that. For instance, one of his big gripes was there was little or no engagement by Darragh O'Brien or Micheál Martin or anybody at that level. So it was lip service, and they were not putting the provisions in place to actually make things happen. So he resigned, sent a letter of resignation, and I asked some journalists to put in freedom of information requests to see if that letter would be released. And no different than the shenanigans you've seen with Simon Coveney and Leo Varadkar recently over Mariongate. You had all types of prevarication, sending you the response. They sent out the response letter that they sent to Darragh, or to John Moran, but nothing about the reason and the content of why John resigned. So again, there's a key indicator in my mind that this is more about spin and substance. I welcome it if it does give rise to more houses and more affordable housing, but the jury has to stay out on that. And from my experience, these people have as much political will in them to deliver on this as, you know, I don't know who as the aforementioned Simon Coveney and Owen Murphy. It's more of the same. Here's an interesting thing for you. Our focus in Right2Homes, and you asked me about that, was supporting the creation of legislation aimed primarily at dealing with exactly what we're talking about today. But this is 2021. 2016 is when we started this journey with the very same Fianna Fáil people that are now talking about 2030. So you could be forgiven for being skeptical. And I would really wait to see what happens there. And they'll be long gone, like Dempsey and Ahern and all the rest of them, with their pensions and waffling on about their record speaks for itself. But delivery is going to be very, very difficult. Keeping people in their homes was a key element. Now, here's an interesting one for you. In our journey, it was put to us on many an occasion inside Leinster House that if we felt that it was wrong for the banks to be selling families and distressed mortgages and loans to vulture funds, why didn't we do something about it without legislation? So we did. And we were met with a barrier of resistance. But we set up home options. And we managed to raise hundreds or backing for hundreds of millions to avoid families falling into that scenario. And on that journey, I managed to convince Erskine Holmes in Northern Ireland to be the chairman of Home Options. Now, Erskine attended meetings with Micheál Martin and with Darragh O'Brien and Jim O'Callaghan and anyone who was willing, Michael McGrath, anyone who was willing to meet with us. And the only support came from Sinn Féin, came from a couple of independents mostly, and then one or two of the smaller parties, but none from Fine Gael, obviously, and in the end, none from Fianna Fáil. But Erskine agreed to be chairman. Now, Erskine's in his 80s. He's an absolute gentleman, but he's the founder of USIT in Northern Ireland. That's the Ulster Community Investment Trust. And he's directly and indirectly responsible for the provision of some tens of thousands of affordable homes and co-op homes and co-ownership homes in Northern Ireland. So it can be done if the will is there. And what he suggested to me this morning in an email, having read the part of Darragh O'Brien's plan, he said that if they were really serious about tackling this, they would do what he did back in 1976, and that was they appointed land officers with the power to make compulsory purchases. And that would force the hoarders to either develop or to sell to local authorities or approved housing bodies. Now, there's something that could have been a radical thing that could have been in that bill. It's been done before. I introduced Erskine to them. He has explained all of that to Darragh. Not a sign of it, not a jot, and nothing there for the hundreds of thousands of people who are caught in the clutches of vulture funds.
Okay.
It's like that problem doesn't exist,
Mm-hmm.
but it hasn't gone anywhere.
Right. Well, I suppose for somebody like myself who doesn't understand these matters very well, what I do note is that a quarter of the €4 billion budget, the €4 billion housing budget, is now being used up in supports to landlords, namely HAP. So basically what we're having is a transfer of taxpayers' money to private landlords. And there doesn't seem to be a will on the part of the government to invest in social housing. That is, a really, really serious problem. The other thing is that I don't think that there is a supply of skills in the country at the moment to deliver these houses that they're speaking about. Now, at the height of the Celtic Tiger, there was 60,000 houses per year or more being built. This Housing for All plan launched this week promises to deliver approximately 33,000 houses a year. But there is a huge shortage of skills. Now, I'm hearing anecdotally that tradesmen like carpenters are commanding up to €300 per day, simply because there's not enough skilled tradesmen in the country. So in order to deliver these housings, I suppose the only option is to bring in tradesmen from abroad, and that then also increases pressure on housing because they have to be accommodated. Would you like to comment on that, Brian?
Well, I mean, that is, I did speak to some very experienced people in that sector, and they welcomed the plan. They're notwithstanding the challenge in terms of getting skilled workers. But that, as we all know, Anna, is going to take time and take years. That's not much comfort to the people trying to get an apartment or a house right now, or the people who are under threat of losing the home, the roof they have over their heads. So, as I said to you, my comment wouldn't carry any weight. It's just as good as anybody else's opinion, or as bad, but and unqualified. But what I can do is, as I have been asked to do, is comment with just some justification, I think, on how much credit you can give to the messengers in this case, because their track record is dismal. Don't forget, in Fianna Fáil's case, they actually had a massive role in creating this whole mayhem. They then, between them, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, they dismantled the construction industry. They're the reason that a lot of these companies and people are gone and didn't build any houses. As you said, they were building 60 and 70,000 houses a year. It's been long flagged that we have an increasing population, that we're encouraging people to come back to the country, that there's fantastic growth from foreign direct investment into Ireland, and that brings all its own pressures. All of that is known. And certainly the threat of cuckoo funds and vulture funds, out of Darragh O'Brien's own words, was clear as a bell in 2016. So coming up with a plan in 2021, telling us that it'll be all hunky-dory by 2030, and just for a moment go back and look at those other plans that Simon Coveney delivered with the straightest of faces. Father Peter McVerry was at a meeting with us just recently, and he'd remind everybody that, as would Focus Ireland, that every single time one of these plans was delivered, the problem got worse. Property got dearer, rents got dearer, homelessness got worse. So I hate to say it, because by nature I'm an optimist, but given my experience, been led up the garden path for the last 5 years, I think the best way to summarize this, Anna, is that the jury is out. And for my money, they should have looked at compulsory purchasing to deal with the properties that exist at the moment, and put them to use. And then they should have measures to keep people in their homes. And on that, can I just finish on this subject?
Yes.
On Right2Homes and our activities. So we've shifted. I mean, we've given up on Fianna Fáil. They're a complete waste of time. I remember being on a radio program with Pat Kenny, and I can't remember the minister at the time, but he said to me, you know, I sympathise with Brian's position. And I said, this was in a matter relating to the print sector. And I said, I don't need your sympathy. I said, you're on your way out. It's the people out there that we're appealing to exercise their option to force change. So, and here we are again. So I think Fianna Fáil are spent force. We've got to look to the future, and hopefully get more independence into a position where they can influence things. So on that footing, we have engaged with Matty McGrath and his Rural Independence Group, with Michael Fitzmaurice, with the guys who have been a real voice for people in distress, be that borrowers or homeowners or farmers. So a new piece of legislation, 2 pieces of legislation have been launched with into the Ceann Comhairle's office. One is the Impaired Farm Credit Bill, again drafted by Edmund Honohan, and that will be launched and supported by the Rural Independents and Michael Fitzmaurice and many, many others. And just watch the true colours of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and the Greens when that hits the floor. And the second one, bringing us right back to 2016, is a revised version of the bill that was abandoned by Darragh O'Brien and Micheál Martin. Micheál Martin, when I met him the first time, and we had a high-powered, well, a very well-qualified, experienced group of people in the team who went in to meet. And I won't name them all, but there were people from banking, people from accountancy, people from politics, and people from the legal side of the world. And Micheál Martin marched into the room and wagged his finger and said, his opening remark was, he would not be, and this was in 2018, he would not be bounced into taking action at other people's, responding to pressure from other people. And my reply to him was, perish the thought, being bounced into doing anything, 5 years, 7 years into a crisis. So that man is useless. The sooner he's gone, the better. And okay. I think that's it. We've got to reach out to the independents and Sinn Féin and anybody else who will look seriously at tackling these problems.
Okay, well, Brian, I just want to thank you most sincerely for taking the time out this evening to chat to me. There is a lot of information there for our viewers to unpack. And as you said yourself, the jury is out now on whether Housing for All is going to deliver and solve our housing crisis, or if it has been a masterclass in spin this week. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you, Anna. You're welcome.
To you who have been watching, I want to thank you for viewing. And I have a small request. Compass Media was set up recently to provide an alternative news platform to give people access to media. We will never ask you for money, but I do ask you please to go to our page, our Facebook page, and follow the page. And also, can I ask you please to share this video to get it out to a much wider audience. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and until we meet again, Bannocht Day or Galéir.